Bad.
A little
Had some
late.
little
Sorry, guys.
technical difficulties here this morning. But we are back for Data Day Wednesday. We got Ken Adamo with us again, and today we are going to talk fuel surcharge. What is it? When can it get us in trouble? Where did it come from? And what's next? To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. You guys ever have the day where like everything falls off the rails?
Yeah,
You gotta kind of stop for a second and go like, holy crap. So we're late this morning because for some reason Restream just wouldn't see my camera. And then I try to get in on my phone and you got all these backup plans and nothing seems to work. And then you know what? And I know it sounds crazy. I literally just rebooted my computer and it worked. So it's
really.
Yeah.
When all else fails, just restart this stuff.
Yeah.
That's
my old VP of sales, originally when I first got into the industry, he used to call this the remote control, and he used to call his computer the TV. And he used to go, when the TV stops working, just kick it. Just kick it. Just kick it. So he used to kick his box underneath his desk, like his desktop underneath it. And it's insane. He was like, no, just take the remote control. Just fix the remote control. So anyways, we're back. We rebooted and
what's going on, everybody?
So,
good morning.
How's everybody doing this morning? And so we're looking forward to hearing more, guys. We're awesome. Nick, thanks for joining us, my friend. Good morning, Jeff. DJ, DJ, and know that problem. That's for sure. Yes, sir. So Nick says, I prefer saving on fuel rather than paying more, for sure. High-tech expert, turn it off and turn it back on. Yeah, exactly. So Ken, today's topic, I know you're massively immersed in this field, fuel. Dean has mentioned a few times when fuel surcharge gets to that 31, 32% of the line haul rates, we can be in real trouble. And, he was sharing some information about the fact that that's the reason a lot of these suppliers went out of business a couple of years ago, was actually that not representing that fuel surcharge accordingly in their company. So I'll let you have the reins. If you can start from a baseline and share with everybody like where that fuel surcharge came from, how it gets applied, how it gets managed, and then we can start the conversation from there. How's that?
Sorry, just to level set, are you talking about from a carrier perspective?
Yes, sir.
All right, so all fuel surcharges have two real core components. You have your presumed mile per gallon, and you have what you call like your peg or your baseline, or it has a bunch of different terms, but it's basically like below this point, there is no fuel surcharge. I would say the most common in the industry, what DAT uses in its reporting, is $1.25 per gallon base and 6.5 miles per gallon for a dry van. And then it goes up, right, as reefers have lower efficiency, flatbeds even less, which makes sense, right? The reefers generally pulling a heavier trailer, they have to put fuel in the reefer unit. Yeah. Flatbeds, by and large, run heavier and are more inefficient. So let's just talk about that $1.25 and that 6.5 miles per gallon. If you take what the EIA, and the EIA is the government entity that reports fuel, comes out every Monday. It's supposed to come out at 4, but like anything with the government, it could be anywhere from 4 until 7 p.m. You take that, you subtract it from the $1.25 that I mentioned, you divide it by 6.5 miles per gallon, and that's what you get in fuel surcharge.
Okay.
So you
where
can
did
see
that
right
$1.25 come from?
So it's very arbitrary. I'd say the $1.25 is pretty common. It was probably when most fuel surcharges were set up. Diesel was probably about $1.25 a gallon or slightly less. And it's really interesting. The government moved to $2.50 peg there for a while. And if you remember when diesel prices were low, a lot of carriers were recovering zero fuel surcharge, hauling for GSA or DOD there for a long time. Obviously now they're getting reimbursed, but I don't think we'll ever see $1.25 per gallon diesel again. No. So what we're always talking about is marginal analysis, right? So if we think about how much diesels went up over the last couple of weeks, right? So let's just kind of level set. How much has diesel gone up? It's been $1.15. Is that it? Is that correct?
So we're in liters up here, but so we've gone from $1.60 to $1.90. Some places $1.80. There's some places that are over $2 in Northern Ontario. So that comes to I think DJ and I figured it out the other day. We're somewhere around like $4.80 or something.
Yeah, I think it was like
gallon.
just under $5 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that calculation seems complex, right? So, but what it really simplifies is that when you're looking at week to week, all you really need to do is divide the week over week change by 6.5, or whatever your company's fuel surcharge is, and that'll give you how much it went up or down week over week. So let's just take, we are up $1.15 a gallon over the last 2 weeks. If I divide that by 6.5, that means the fuel surcharge went up 18 cents
a mile.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
Okay. That's insane. So now you have some variables here, obviously, that we're looking at, right? If your fleet's not running at 6.5, like if you have dry vans not running at 6.5, if they're at 7 or 7.2, or if drivers are harder, all that kind of stuff. So there's those minor variables. But those minor variables, if you're talking 6.5 versus 7%, that could equate to a ton of extra fuel burnt at the end of a year, or the end of 6 months, or the end of 3 months.
Oh, for sure. So this is the way, and this is advice across all spectrums, because it can be interpreted a bunch of different ways. There's a lot of negotiation that goes whenever you're talking about establishing a fuel surcharge. You can negotiate on the base, and you can negotiate on the efficiency. So let's just say that you're going into a bid, and this applies to brokers and carriers, right? You're going into a bid, and if you don't look at that fuel surcharge, let's just say that they put a 7.5 mile per gallon peg in that, which is not uncommon, right? Shippers are wising up to the fact that fleets are becoming more efficient. I've seen efficiency ratings as high as 8-9 miles per gallon. So if you're a carrier, but if you're a carrier and you're running 7.5 miles per gallon, which is actually good, it's a mile per gallon better than kind of that average.
Yeah.
And you're only getting compensated for 7.5 or 8 miles per gallon. You're losing a mile per gallon of efficiency, which in this market would be several cents per mile. That can mean the difference between profit and loss.
Yeah. Holy cow.
So it's really important. And let's just say, someone puts a crazy, what I've seen recently, well, not recently, there was this kind of happening trend towards a cap. I think it was some really excellent foresight by some really smart players to say, like, look, we're going to cap fuel at $5. It's never going to go above. That way it keeps us from printing pages on our fuel surcharge. And, fuel's never going to go that high. Well, what happens if your EIA ultra low sulfur diesel price is capped at $5 a gallon and it's currently at $5.25? You can't recoup that 25 cents per gallon.
Nick said in California,
crazy.
even over $5.50 per gallon. So
yeah.
That actually, Nick brings up a very good point. Nick, thank you for bringing that up. It's also where you're running freight to and from.
Yes.
So, if you're filling up in, New Jersey, and it's $4.50 a gallon, and you're running to California, you're going to have to fill back up in California in order to get home. Probably before that, but if you end up, say, in California, and you're pricing out your fuel surcharge at the average of when you fill at $4.50, you're actually losing $1 a liter based on 6.5 gallons, and so all your math now gets construed. So how are as a broker, how are we to better understand the fuel so we can obviously speak about it in an intellectual manner to our customer, but also understand it when these jumps? Because you were talking about 18 cents a mile. So if you're talking just in the last 2 weeks, so if you're talking, you went out to a supplier and you said, "Hey, what's the rate? The rate's $1,000. Now it's $1,180 if it's 1,000 miles, right? Because you're 18 cents a mile." So how do we, as brokers, start to really understand that, Ken?
So if I was a broker, when I was a broker running a pricing department, I was always pushing to get established fuel surcharges in place with my shippers. If I don't have that, I'm really at the mercy of the person on the other end of the phone or the other end of the computer doing an email. And I will tell you that the people who really lose out during these ramp ups in fuel are people without established fuel surcharges. If you have an established fuel surcharge, that 18 cents is automatically, in theory, passed along to you, right? Your shipper's going to pay you whatever your negotiated base rate is, plus the fuel surcharge. It passes along. The only real thing you have to look for is, one, is it an appropriate fuel surcharge? And two, to the comment about California, you can go to the EIA's website and see that diesel right now, so they break the country up into PADD, P-A-D-D, and most fuel surcharges that I've seen are based on just the national. So right now it's $5.25. Right now it's $6.26 in California.
$6.26 a gallon.
Yeah, and if you go to EIA's website, right, EIA.com/petroleum/gas diesel. So it's the difference between $6.25. Let me bust out my TI-83 here, and $5.25. So that's $1 divided by 6.5. That's 15 more cents. Right? So if I'm a broker,
so now we're 33 cents.
Yeah. So if I'm a broker with a load picking up in California, that's what I'm thinking about, right? Is because my fuel surcharge isn't recouping that extra 15 cents. Okay, so let's just talk about.
You guys get paying attention to this.
So let's just say you don't have a fuel surcharge.
Right? I'm friggin' blown away. I understand. I mean, and we all live in this bubble, right? Like, especially brokers, I think more than carriers. Yeah. Like carriers, when you're understanding that part of it, so the fleet manager, the maintenance, all that kind of stuff, the CFO, all the owners, and they understand that portion of it, and their perspective is shifted. But I mean, I sit here and I say, gas is going up 4 cents a liter. Go get fuel tonight and fill up my car. And I drive like a hybrid electric, so I'm like 4.2 liters per 100 kilometers. So I don't have to fill up for another 9 weeks. It really doesn't impact my world in that manner. So when Ken's breaking it out like this, like my brain is going, because I'm sitting there going, holy shit. So you're talking 33 cents in the last 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Per mile.
Yep.
The increase just in fuel. And then you look at, like, and I start doing the math, and I'm saying to myself, like,
that's exactly what you said. 1,000 miles. I mean, we're an extra.
Well, so DJ, I look at it and I say, okay, we're talking California. So I look at California, Ontario, which is like 3,400, 3,600 miles. Yeah. At 33 cents a mile, like that's incredible amount of money. If you're in, like, if a carrier is taking a spot market rate, is that included? And that was the thing Dean brought up a while back, was like a lot of these spot market rates. Because Dean, I think, was it 2 weeks ago, DJ? Dean was saying that it was upwards around that 29 cents a mile. Yeah, and as soon as it gets to that 31 cents a mile, that's unaccounted for.
33.
Yeah. So I would think right now, I mean, we're over that. Because just in the last 2 weeks, if we're talking that kind of increase at 33 cents a mile. Well, he said that's what
triggered. Well, when Dean was talking about that, Dean said that's what triggered the Celadon kind of falling off and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we're at 62 cents a mile national fuel surcharge.
So at 62 cents a mile, from an operating ratio, would that be inwards of that 32%, 31%?
Yeah, are we pushing that 30%?
Yeah, I mean, so I talked to Dean yesterday, and we're above that, but I mean, it's very. I think this will be temporary. We're seeing wholesale diesel prices drop. Okay. I think we're starting to see some retail prices drop. I think what you saw back in the Celadon days was kind of a prolonged increase, and it was in a low rate environment. So let's just kind of. It's not as doom and gloom, I think, as it's not. I think
okay, good. Well, okay.
What I would say is, fuel surcharge aside, the best advice I would give when I was in the industry that I tried to push onto the brokers, and especially if you're a carrier right now, even if you're negotiating all-in rates, do the mental math of fuel and base. You're doing yourself a disservice. If you're just negotiating $1,000 load last week, so let's just talk about this in like super simple math. So this isn't going to be accurate, but it works for the comparison. Let's just say 2 weeks ago, you moved a load for $1,000. And super rough math, 800 of that was base and 200 of that was fuel. The fuel portion of that is going to go up, right? So let's just say you're not really paying attention. And then today you get a call from the same shipper. They're like, $1,000 still good. And you're like, yep, market didn't change that much. I'm not seeing any tighter capacity out there. You call your carrier and your carrier goes, it's $1,300. My fuel surcharge just went up 30%. And what do you say? Well, I should have thought about that. So
see, this is key. This is key, Ken, because as a broker, you typically look at capacity, not that necessarily that fuel. And you look at this is key for all of you out there. Pay attention to this, because that is difference between actually making a profit and losing money on an order.
Yeah, I mean, I'm drawn to low margin businesses. I was in energy before I came to freight. Actually, I'm in software now. I can't say that anymore. It's been actually relieving the past 2 years. But let's flip that advice to a carrier. Let's just say that's a same $1,000 load. You get a call from a broker. You're like, that sounds good. $800 will cover my base. $200 will cover my fuel. I get that call back. Let's just say maybe I didn't fill up. Maybe I was out of service. I went to get new brakes or something. You get that same call from that same broker. $1,000. Yeah, it sounds great. Well, it was a good load last time. Good shipper. I'll take it. Broker's thinking, my base line haul just went down $100, right? Because like you didn't capture that fuel you could have charged me for. And I'll tell you, in the data, there are more carriers losing sight of the fuel surcharge than there are brokers. Because what we're seeing is base allocations dip and fuel eating more of that total price. Right?
See, I would have totally thought it was reverse.
Now, I mean, brokers just have access. I mean, we're in a lucky, and this isn't an ad, right? But we're in a lucky position that most brokers have rate view in our tools, and they can see fuel and base splitting, right? So they're able to kind of stay on top of that. And sure, there are brokers, especially small brokers out there that are missing it, and it's a mismatch of negotiation that'll get you in trouble, right? If you walk into a car dealership and you have no idea what you're talking about, the salesman's going to eat you for lunch, right?
That's right.
But if you walk into a car dealership,
I would like to think if they're a good salesman, they'll actually educate you instead of eating you for lunch. But I agree. I think they, for the most part, people will, for sure.
Yeah. But if you walk into a car dealership and you have all your homework, you have the Kelley Blue Book, you have True Car pulled up, and you run into this, brand new salesman that still has like the crinkles in their new shirt, you're gonna take them to town. So it's like,
I love it.
It's all about like being balanced in information, and that's what we're all about. Is like I want carriers and brokers to be armed with information so they can both make decisions that are good for their businesses, because that's when like everything functions well. Because what's going to happen, right? You might think as a broker, like, no, I don't want these carriers to know what's going on. I want them to charge less for fuel. Well, then they're all going to go out of business, and you're not going to have any capacity.
Exactly. And that's where you said it so perfectly, but that's where we should be doing that to begin with. We're on the same team trying to move products somewhere, so we should be working with this from the same view. But yeah, exactly.
I think that's what it comes down to. Is like brokers do really well when carriers are operating well. Carriers do really well when brokers and shippers are feeding them profitable freight and being mindful of their time and respectful of what you're asking them to do. And that's just kind of a universal truth. Right now, again, if you're not paying attention to what's happening, you're stepping in it, for lack of for a politically correct way to say it. I would say you're in deep, but
you're in deep shit. You can say it. I mean, nobody in transportation ever hears that kind of language. So we tend to keep it, less than
you're a broker,
we tend to keep it in the general audience.
I was a broker carrier. You walk an LTL dog, you've heard words. I mean, it's worse than being on a ship. I've heard words I never, like swear words put together that I never thought you could put together.
And afterwards, you're thinking to yourself, you're like, that's actually a really good one. I'm going to have to use that one somehow.
I'm going to use that next time.
So Nick brings up something, and I'd love to hear more about it. That is why CBIS 21 is helping all involved, many carriers and owner ops. I'm unaware of this. What is this?
Yeah. Explain.
I've never heard it.
Yeah,
so Nick, if you can explain that a little bit. I've never heard of CIBUS 21 is helping all involved.
Yeah.
A radical evolution of the combustion chemistry and existing compression ignition engines to bring it sounds like that sentence was written for investors, let me tell you.
Yeah.
They could have simplified it with a new diesel technology.
Yeah. So I guess it's a piece of technology that's helping out maybe in engines.
Okay.
Cleaner, more efficient, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I'll have to research that. And Nick, DM me. I'd love to hear more about that. So as we're stepping forward then into an environment like this, what are some of the common terms, or is there a common conversation that you see that brokers can have with their customers to transition them from a spot to base plus fuel?
So I think, and this is like the most counterintuitive point that's hard to explain, of why these high fuel spikes can flip a whole market for an entire cycle, right? If this persists, my full expectation would be that this starts the downward trend we've been expecting in base rates. And the reason is for almost exactly what you described. People want to get back to the surety of having this stuff written down, right? So we've already started to see this migration to contract. especially on the carrier side. Large carriers are starting to say, hey, I'm going to start dedicating more and more and more of my capacity back to my contract customers. Spot rates were really good. Even though fuel was high, I was getting really, really high base rates. But now, you know what? This fuel thing I don't want to mess around with. Insurance went up in the new year. I have all my new operating costs. I'm going to start taking possession of these new trucks that are more expensive, right? That presumably I ordered and I start to get this year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to the contract market. So that naturally starts to deflate the spot market a bit. And I think that happens more organically. What sets people apart is how on top of things they are, right? It's like, look, hey, I've been moving this rate for you. I know there's been a ton of price volatility. Maybe we lock, maybe we get into some sort of fixed pricing agreement to help take that volatility out of your budget. And those are discussions I think that can happen and do happen, which is ultimately what takes the steam out of the spot market.
So as a if you were looking at the fuel surcharge today, and this is going to be for all you brokers out there that are saying, you know what, yeah, I want to turn my numbers into a cost plus fuel, or a base plus fuel, let's say. And I like that, because I think as fuel goes down, the customer automatically gets a reprieve in costing. What would be the kind of cents per mile you would be using if they were to go to their customer today?
I would use a fuel surcharge. I mean, you can use DAT's fuel surcharge. You can pick any one that's widely available. Like, if you're a broker,
but what I'm saying, Ken, is would you take the number? So let's call it $1,000 today is what your customer says. Hey, can you do this load for $1,000 today? That $1,000 load, would you just go to DAT's fuel? If it was 34%, you pull $340 off the 1,000, and that's your base? Or what would you suggest from what the data tells you? Is it like a little bit inflated? Do you go at 7 miles per gallon? Do you go instead of 6.5? Like, what is the math that you would do as a rep to get a decent base plus fuel for your customer today?
I'd get really itchy about locking in fuel. If they were really pushing me on an all-in rate, I would do pretty much what you would described. I would go in and I would, we could provide it in an Excel file. I mean, you could just make yourself a little Excel thing, because the market's going to change, right? I mean, what we talk about today is going to be different. I mean, that math is really, really simple. I would just say, like, look, what are the current diesel prices, which anyone on your brokerage floor would be able to grab for you if you didn't have. I would subtract it by the $1.25, divide by 6.5. And I think that 6.5 gives you a little bit of padding, because most fleets are running above that now. Most dry van fleets with modern equipment are running above that. Even if it's a 1/4 mile per gallon, that's a decent amount of buffer. I'm not super comfortable with making margin on fuel, so I would pass that along totally.
Yep.
And then I would go with the base. So like in today's environment, what I would do is, if like the load's currently all in $1,400, and a customer wanted to lock that in for a year, I'd be, to quote my favorite, I'm wearing Akron, but I'm a Pittsburgh sports fan, and Mike Lang, the Penguins announcer, is my favorite. If you're ever bored, look up Mike Lang-isms. But if I were a broker right now and a shipper wanted to lock in current spot plus fuel rates for a 1-year deal, I'd be smiling like a butcher's dog. Right? I'd be happy as a clam. Right? I'm at the top of a market.
Some of the lines you come up with are awesome, bro.
Yeah, smiling like a butcher's dog. We need that one. I love that one.
But in all seriousness, right? You're asking me to lock in at the highest spot rates have arguably ever been, in literally the highest fuel surcharges have been since deregulation. I'll shake your hand right now. Right? In most situations, shippers are going to go, what? They might want to base it off some historical market. It'd be like they might just put it out to bid. And I think most brokers are starting to, like, for the first time in a long time, they're starting to bid forward freight a little bit cheaper than current market. Right.
So here's my question, and I'll share some conversations I had back in 2018, 19, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen again. So in 2018, when ELD hit and cost and capacity started going through the roof, we saw it just in the customers I dealt with and in the asset-based customers that I dealt with. We saw more contracts come out, more bids come out. We won, meaning the people I was working with, probably 65-70% of the bids we went into. And as soon as 2019 hit, I would be surprised if 3% of them actually followed through.
Yeah, paper rates.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, it put these companies off of these people that were doing bids. And, you know, and I know other companies that mid 2018, they went to their customers. They said, listen, the rate volatility is insane. What we're going to do is we're going to lock you in, but you have to stick with us if something happens. We will adjust accordingly, but kind of went in and with the data. And this is key for all you brokers, is they went in with the data and said, here's what the data tells us. Here's what the market tells us. Let's create a baseline and let's make everyone happy. We want to be profitable. You need us to be profitable, because if we're not profitable, we go out of business. You're back in the market of trying to find, you know, the devil that you know, or the devil you don't know, you know, the person showing up with a horse and buggy and a trailer falling apart, or us. So there's an argument for both sides, I guess. Right, Ken?
Yeah.
So, you know, for anyone that's out there and saying, okay, I want to go lock this in, but obviously as a spot market rate are so high, how do we even start to gather a base rate plus fuel? Because as much as customers, you made a very valid point where customers said, I'm going to go buy historical data. That historical data means nothing anymore. Like even data from 2 months ago, what a customer paid on an arbitrary one-off load. I remember a student calling me saying, customer just said they want to pay $900 to Chicago from Toronto. I said, that's absolutely impossible. He said, well, they moved one 3 months ago. And so they've arbitrarily picked the lowest rate they moved 3 months ago. So this was back in December. So it would have been like September. They moved 3 months ago, and that's the rate they want to pay. I go, but the market is just, the freight will sit on your dock forever. So how does one go about doing that, brother?
So here's what I would say. I mean, this is not a commercial, but we've seen record uptake in our forecasting product for this exact reason, right? I mean, you can go in there and punch in how long the bid lasts for, and it'll tell you what 96% accuracy what the spot market's going to do. You know, I don't think it's a bad idea if it's not a ton of lanes to trend out what the last 13 months were. Like, so the last month plus 12 months before that, so you can get a year-over-year comp. And then, you know, if you don't, I understand if people don't have a budget for high-end data. Like, I get it. Not every broker that's just starting out, especially, but you can go in, you can pull like the last 6, 10, 12 months, 13 months of data, and then see what that, like, what are you hearing? You're listening to this show, you're listening to maybe Dean, Ned and I talk every week, you're listening to reading JOC or some of the reputable things. If you're at an all-time high, which I think most people know that right now, we are at a peak. So if I write a peak and I'm like, you know, there's still some uncertainty around COVID, I'm not going to assume it's going to be like late 18 when it fell like a rock. Let's just say I assume that the market's going to maybe coast over the next 12 months and I'm going to end 10% lower than I am now. So maybe I'll assume diesel at $3.50 a gallon and 10% less base rates and go in with that. That's something I feel like is pretty low risk. I'm offering the shipper savings now. And if things really go sideways, I can always go to them if I'm providing good service and bring this up again. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a pretty prudent strategy. Bidding's a lot of exploration at times, right? So unfortunately, when you sit down with a new broker and they're like, okay, I got you in front of me, what's the secret? I'm like, unfortunately, the secret is you got to lose a lot of bids to get really good at it. Mm-hmm. Even with the best data, right? There's still an art around, like, where do I put more margin? And young brokers don't really, I mean, like new brokers, I don't care how old you are. Like, okay, I have Atlanta to Jacksonville and Jacksonville to Atlanta. Which one do I put more margin on? And they're like, well, I'll just put the same margin on both. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like head haul, back haul dynamics. What's a retail lane? Last time I was here, we talked about warehousing. Those retail customers typically drive lower margins, right? Even though the service expectations are a little high. So I think these are all things that you just gain with experience. But right now, I'd be trying to win some freight a little bit below the current spot market, because I know something that maybe brokers who aren't paying attention don't. And because they're just going to lose. If you come in with a shipper and say, like, fully loaded, it is what it is today, they're going to be like, yeah, okay, thanks.
Especially if they're already got somebody in there moving it. You know, the reality is if they're moving it, there's got to be a give, whether it be the person can't get capacity and you can, which is what the majority of people are winning business with these days, is they have the contacts, they have the people in place to get capacity. They're getting capacity where customers can't, and they're saying, well, I have to move the freight, so I'll pay what I got to pay for right now. But that's a vicious cycle that comes back. And we saw it in 2019 where shippers were like, hey, I remember a customer coming to me saying, hey, can you quote out these lanes? We were doing a piece of his business. And I said, sure. I said, are they not performing? He goes, no, I've taken it up the arse for a year now. I'm going to make my money back. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I go, well, what about our lanes? He goes, well, when we, in 2018 to 19, my cost to customers only went up about 4% because I was a very big dedicated individual. So it was the same carriers all the time, kept them busy all year round. So our cost didn't really fluctuate. I mean, a couple of the LTLs every 2 weeks out of California, like doubled and tripled almost at some point. So he wanted me to quote them in order to get him better numbers for stuff that the other person hadn't dedicated from. And that's going to be, I mean, I believe wholeheartedly, this is what customers are going to be looking for once the market starts to turn. Once it turns to a shipper market again, they're going to be demanding. And there's a few challenges that I see going along with it. And, one is, it's not just fuel. Every cost has gone up. The cost of speaking to a buddy of mine the other day, what used to be like a $35,000-$40,000 trailer is now a $70,000 trailer. And it's like all these costs have risen. Driver wages have drastically increased. So I don't see freight coming down that much. I mean, I see there being a little bit of a reprieve, but I don't see it coming down that much. And I think as a broker, we have to have this conversation with our customers because we have to prepare them. So, you look at the whole Frito-Lay PC and Frito-Lay Loblaws thing that's going on, where Frito-Lay is like, we need an increase in price. And I understand both sides. Frito-Lay is saying we need an increase in price, and Loblaws is saying, but we have to protect our customers because we're all feeling it. But I think we're at a point in life, in the world, where we're just going to have to pay more for stuff. And that's just what it is. And we have to figure out a way to be profitable. We have to be leaner on other ends in order to be profitable.
I mean, inflation's this universal pressure both ways, right? I mean, it's this universal pressure on the entire economy, right? And we talk about this a lot with new folks to the industry, and we go into boardrooms. It's like, okay, think about your average truck driver. Yeah, the truck's more expensive. Like all those direct costs, sure, they're all more expensive. But what about the wages of the guy or gal changing your brakes?
Mm-hmm.
What about the TA attendant that's calling you for your shower? What about the power, right, that's going into that TA or that mechanic shop? The water, the soap. I mean, soaps have seen, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but like we went to Costco and so I look into it. I'm like, why is this so expensive? And it turns out like a lot of like the micro beads and stuff that are in modern soaps are through the roof price wise. So yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point though, kind of bringing it back around. Another good tip is to look at what current contract rates are. So, we report contract rates, others report contract rates. And when you're doing your pricing, do like a triangulation, if nothing else, a sanity check against where those current contract rates are. So if your bundled all-in price is 10 to 15% above current contract rates, that's what you're going to be selling to the shipper, whether you realize it or not, right? So if you go in there 60% above current contract rates, they're going to be like, why would I do this? I'll just add, I'll grant my current carriers a 20%. They'll be happy as all could be.
Yeah.
And so like that's another way to triangulate where you should be pricing, because those current contract rates are a really good indication of what's happening in that side of the market, which by the way is the 80% of the market, right?
Yeah. We'll go back to Jeff here. Jeff says margins should only be on base, not applied to the total cost. 1,000 total cost, 10% margin, 1,100 base, 800 fuel surcharge, 200 plus margin, 1080. Fuel surcharge should be a pass through. It's unethical to add margins to fuel surcharge.
Yeah.
I agree with Jeff.
I agree.
I agree. There's been, I can remember back in my career when, I would literally charge what the carrier wanted, and I had like a 13-15% fuel, and the fuel was my margin. And I remember somebody coming to me saying, yeah, he goes, Dan, that's it. Just like lay it out for the customer so they understand. Like if you're charging fuel on top of your margin, like it's inflating everything. Right.
Well,
and Jeff's right.
That's what Dad's rate view does that really well. I mean, it does break that all down.
Yeah. And then
I agree. I was speaking purely of cost, right?
Sorry, go.
Hey.
I was speaking purely of cost, right? So when I was doing the $1,000 breakdown, that was just like a pure cost side. I mean, because I agree, you should be applying margin on top of base and not fuel. But I think it's less about ethics, because I do agree it's ethical. I think it's more just about having that forces you to have a better idea of what you're actually paying.
Understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Without that, you're just arbitrarily winging it.
You're just, yeah. Agreed. Agreed. He disappeared on us, but yeah, no, I agree completely with what you're saying, and that's my wife loving the Zips.
Yes, they play UCLA tomorrow. They're going to get crushed, but I'm here for it. I'm here for it. They beat Kent State.
So Nick says, let's shake up the industry, guys. And I agree. I think this industry needs a shaking. I think it's in time. You know, the automotive industry got a shaking when Tesla really started to push it years ago, and they're continuing to get shaking, and it's moving the industry in the right direction. And I think as sales reps, we are the movers and shakers. We are the ones that literally come into the industry and set the tone for what's going to happen. And, you know, to me, I don't know about you guys, but I'd love to hear the one thing that you think is going to shake up the industry. To me, it's total immersive education with our customers and transparency.
Transparency. Yep. I was going to say the same thing. The transparency is the key, but you hit it on the head with the car industry. I mean, how more transparent can it be? There's like 12 different sites that tell you this is how much that car should be. I mean, if somebody says, well, this is how much it is, you're full of shit.
And like Ken said right at the beginning, you go in with your education in line, and you know where you're at. I mean, I remember when I bought my car, I walked in with like a spreadsheet. For 6 months. I did like the fuel and what the miles and everything. And I broke everything. Yeah, calculator. Exactly. I broke everything. I walked into the dealership and I said, okay, so I can actually make $11,000 in year one because I get an incentive from the government. Plus I'm going to save this on fuel. Plus then you take away the car payment. I mean, I went from a Charger SRT to a Fusion Energy, right? So I went from like 16.9 liters per 100 kilometers to like 1.2. You know what I mean? So, but I went in with that education. And as a broker, that education is everything. Because I'll say it, as a broker, your business is information. It's really what it is. You're connecting the dots and you're transferring information. Yes. That's what your customer is paying you for.
You're basically the researcher for your customer. You're trying to give them the best information you possibly can find to help them do their job the best way they can.
I love Hayden. Collaboration is of the essence now more than ever. We have to remove silos to find new synergies, efficiencies, pick another buzzword. Yes, that is.
Love it.
Bang on. And Jeff says, boom, bang on. Way to go. All right, brother DJ.
All right, hey, we're
at that time. Ken, you the man,
technical difficulties, guys. Ken, thank you so much. Go Zips.
Go Zips. And go Bucks.
Hey, maybe UCLA does the same thing that happened to Kent. You never know.
Maybe, and then maybe we have like an Ohio. Is it possible to have Ohio State play Akron in the national championship? Is that too much to hope for?
Oh, that would be insane. But thank you, Ken. Again, I will be rooting for the UCLA thing to hopefully happen. But shout out to Daman and American Logistics and Centurion Trucking. To Dat, Dean, we missed you today, but Ken, we love having Ken here, so thank you, Ken.
Actually, DJ, I think next week it's Dean, Ken.
Do we have both, right?
I think it's the four of us next week because that would be our
trying to make that happen next week. Yeah,
next week, next Wednesday. So everybody tune in because we're going to have two mad scientists of data on the show next week.
You got the mentor and the young Yoda in training. But again, so thank you guys. Monday through Friday, check us out live, 9 a.m. to 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. To start your day right with us, get the information, do your research, learn your job, help your customers. And I don't even know if this is a quote because it doesn't have it by anybody, but I just loved it so much. All we get is time and choices. Be wise with both.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversation,